Hello there everybody and welcome to a new video for Age of Wonders 4. This one is a unit guide for the Industrious culture. I'm going to go over the entire roster here, explain the different strengths and weaknesses of each of those units, and of course we're going to have a nice little summary at the end of this video. So I'm going to start out with the Pioneer here, the Tier 1 Scout unit of these folks. So this is one hell of an interesting cavalry unit. For one, of course, they come with a prospecting skill, which is not a military skill at all. I want to keep it here to the military traits mostly. They come with the most powerful ranged attack that any scout unit can muster in the game. So it's also a one action point attack, and due to the fact that these guys come naturally as cavalry, you have the ability to pick up a racial mount trait, and you gain a scout unit that has a considerable ranged attack. Okay, it's only one shot, it ain't that hard, but it's stronger than any scout unit. And if you have a sizable mount on, like a spider or a wolf on top of that, your scouts grow into something more powerful than other people's scouts all of a sudden. This is also coming together with a nice map mobility when it comes down to mountains and unfavorable terrain, so these guys can have some interesting strategic uses when you're combining them with powerful mounts. Apart from that, they have the most powerful ranged attack I have found on scout units so far. Let's get on over to Tier 1 Shields here. So, the Anvil Guard, what an interesting unit. First off, I have to point out these guys have basically the weakest melee attack of all Tier 1 units I have analyzed so far, but they are meant to be played a little bit different. So they have the ability to taunt enemies and then they go into defense mode. This is really interesting because this forces the enemy to attack this guy here, and this is interesting out of two reasons. First off, bolstering is a trait that every dwarven industrious unit has, and it basically gives them resistances fitting to the type of attack that smacked them whenever they get smacked. This results in a massively high resistance value over the course of the time, and Watchful is another trademark skill of this faction, which gives them more retaliation attacks. So I think by now it becomes pretty clear what their role is. Stand in front of the enemy, taunt them, and go into defense mode afterwards and deal your damage while retaliating, while not feeling too much while receiving a beating. This is an interesting choice because that makes them really different from all the shield units I've played so far. Pretty solid one, but not too high in the damage. It really is not the main damage dealer in your faction, but there are options. So let's talk about the Tier 1 Archers here for a moment. These are the damage dealers in your Tier 1 roster. Not only do they have a pretty heavy attack, and again, they don't have the repeating attack from other factions. They can do their attack with just one movement point left. This makes them much more mobile on the battlefield than other archers, because it doesn't matter if they have 1 or 3 action points left when they attack, they deal always the same damage, albeit it's lower than the average archer unit, which can fire 3 shots. This is the averaging amount of damage for 2 shots, which isn't bad at all. But the real power comes when we look at Overdraw Crossbow. This is basically a ranged shock unit attack. It breaks defensive stances, it removes retaliation attacks, unless charge resistance is present, and it uses the entire action points of this unit. So with some smart positioning, you can break points of the enemy defense lines quite easily with that. And due to the fact that your shield units are basically always giving off shield walls, when they use this skill at least, these guys can stand, these guys can stand right behind your front line, be well protected. They also have bolstering, so all in all, they are quite resilient archers with a pretty nasty attack. And with that Overdraw Crossbow skill, you can pinpoint one enemy that you want to either focus out, break his defense mode. For example, you can break a supporter in the back line who's shielding units or a shield unit or something like that. There are so many uses for that one, and the damage is also decent. I really like the archers of this faction because that's all tier 1 here. Pretty powerful. So let's talk about tier 2 units. We got the tier 2 spear. That one is really an odd one. So here we have again a okay melee attack. This is actually pretty good. They also got the bolstering trait and the watchful trait, like all the industrious melee units. What's really interesting about these guys is that they got the rune of retaliation bonus, which reflects 40% of the damage back to the attacker. These guys are really annoying to deal with, and they counter melee builds quite heavily because basically the harder you hit them, the harder they hit back. They are really nice mixed into a front with anvil guards, and they are also really good backline defenders. Again, they share that trademark that they want to be attacked. They want to be the guys reacting, not so much acting on the enemy in the first place. So, this is a solid unit. After all, we combine this with these guys, and then we can pretty much control who's going to attack who, and that's a pretty interesting venue. Let's talk about that a little bit later in more detail. Let's go over to the tier 2 supporters here real quick. This is for one, a really unique unit, and for another thing, the only faction that only has physical damage. All your units have physical damage. You literally have no magic damage whatsoever in your roster. Here we have one super important skill though. This supporter can transform your bolstered stacks into healing and damage. So basically, the more your unit got hit, the more healing and strength you gain. This is really nasty because temporary HP replaces casualties. So if people died, your stack will be much more powerful. To give you an illustration, let's say 5 stacks are being removed, you heal 40 HP, you gain 5 units of strengthened. So first you whittle down the enemy to 50% HP, then they are all of a sudden full HP again and have 50% more damage on top of that. This is annoying as hell to deal with, and this is what Strength from Steel does. It also comes with a low cooldown, so they can use that quite generously all over the battlefield. They can also grant 2 stacks of bolstered defense. It's only physical, but they can therefore remotely generate bolstered stacks without the necessity of getting smacked in the face first. Really powerful as well. Beyond that, they are your standard supporter unit. The real sales point of these guys is that they transform your bolstered stats into healing and damage. This is really annoying to deal with, and these guys are really important for your strategy. I go as far as to say a Industrious army cannot really work without Steel Shapers. They are absolutely mandatory for your battle plan, as far as my opinion goes. So let's go over to the tier 3 unit, the Bastion. So the only faction that has a tier 3 shield unit here. They also come with a subpar melee damage again. That's pretty much their trademark move, but their defenses are nuts. They come with a really high physical defense. Here the numbers are a little bit distorted due to racial trait and transformation, but their baseline defense is pretty high. The baseline defense would be 7, like 4 here with or without flanking, and 7 definitely without flanking. So what's their point, you might ask yourself? I've heard that people were talking really bad about these units, and I think that's absolutely unfair. First of all, they are just a massively souped up version of your anvil guards, but the inspiring defense is really interesting because this is an opportunity to just generate bolstered stacks every second turn, and giving your allies the defense bonuses from the shield wall and everything. So these guys are just living walls, basically. You put them in front of the enemy, you put them into inspiring defense, and this enables the other guys to actually attack again, because there's already somebody being in defense mode, buffing the defenses around you, and therefore you can go crazy with the neighboring units. So all in all, This would be already a pretty solid frame and super annoying to deal with, but it gets better when you note that these guys can receive mounts. If you have picked up a racial mount trait, your bastions will have mounts, and that's just sick. Add wolves for point blank AoE. Add nightmares for morale shaving. These guys are resilient. They just sit in the face of the enemy, and nightmares drain morale the longer they stand next to somebody. That's one option. I think every single mount would play well together with these guys, and due to their insane defensive stats, they wouldn't even be bothered too much from the vulnerabilities that come with being mounted. So yeah, these units, I think they scream for a mount, but even without, they are so annoying to deal with, and they spread again bolster stacks, which you can transform into damage via your Steel Shaper. At this point, I need to point on to the tactical spells, because the tactical spells of the Industrious faction are very important to understand the entire roster. You have here one spell that strips all bolster stacks from all your units and transforms them into strength and crit. So this is why the tier 3 unit of this faction is amazing. It can generate basically bolster stacks for free, and since you can transform these bolster stacks into damage, you can pretty much control where your super buffed up units will grow. That's really amazing. The Bolstering Chant is another cultural spell, a healing spell with bolster stacks. Here again, you have access to a healing spell without even having a supporter. This is again really, really synergistic with this faction, and I think combat casting is extremely mandatory for this faction to fully work out, because otherwise you end up with a roster of very, very unimpressive units that just deal less damage than anybody else. But the key idea and identity behind the Industrious culture is just to sit there and be as impervious as possible and heal up more damage than the enemy can possibly deal to you while you're being pelted by these stupidly hard-hitting obelisks and a reckless, a relentless assault of retaliation attacks. So focusing into retaliation, perks, spells, all these things, that's the key identity of this faction. This is where they really, really shine. So what mixes good into them? Debuffing. Debuffing the enemy is amplifying your strengths even more, and it protects you from units like the Mystic culture, which are good at stripping buffs, because you got one big weakness in your faction, and that's a relative weakness against magical damage and the total incapability to deal any other damage than physical. But due to the fact that you gain so many bonuses, it doesn't matter that much. But diversifying your damage profile is also another thing. Unit enchantments, like, for example, are a good thing to go for. You just got to be aware of the fact that you are a very, very physical faction. So, I hope you found that helpful. Feel free to leave me your comments down below, and if I missed a spot, let us all know, so this video is going to be more valuable. Leave a thumbs up on it. If you enjoyed, also consider subscribing. I'd be delighted if you also checked out the playlist link down there. I've done a lot of info videos for Age of Wonders 4 already, and the playlist leads you to all of them. A big thanks at the end of this video to the supporters of this channel. I deeply appreciate all your support, and if you want to find out more, there's Patreon, PayPal, and Buy Me a Coffee as ways and means to check it out how that works. Either way, I appreciate you watching this video a lot, and I hope you're having a really great day. See you guys next time.